Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ventura County Master Gardeners Speaker Series. Today's presentation, Growing Tomatoes, will be about an hour with time for questions, but we ask that everyone stay muted due to the number of people on the call. If you have a question, please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen and we will get to as many as possible. Our speaker today is Julian Hoyle. He has an extensive international background and education in agriculture. Before he retired and became a master gardener, he worked for Seminus Seeds in Oxnard. In the Master Gardener program, he is a specialist on the helpline and teaches many classes on various horticultural topics. Today, Julian will talk to us about how to grow tomatoes. Learn about tomatoes from propagation to harvest, including types, selection, nutrient needs, growing conditions, and more. Please check out our website and our Facebook page for more information and registration for upcoming classes. Please see these addresses in the chat box, as well as our email address for our Master Gardener helpline, which will answer your gardening questions free of charge. Again, everyone, please stay muted and use the chat box for any questions. Julian?
All right, well, we need to get rid of the poll now. I have the poll still on my screen.
Sorry about that. I ended the poll. It should have disappeared. Is there an X option you can click?
Well, I'll just click, okay, I'll just exit it.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay, are we on?
Yes.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the talk about tomatoes or tomatoes. And let's get moving. All about tomatoes. Look at all those different tomatoes. But before we're going to discuss, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the different types of tomatoes, and then we will discuss how to grow tomatoes. And as you can see here already from the way I'm talking, I'll try and say tomato and not tomato, but it's a long time saying tomato and I have to learn to say tomato. Anyway, so we're going to discuss the different types and then we'll discuss how to grow tomatoes. But first of all, before I get into this, just for your interest, who are the biggest tomato producers in the world? Who do you think produces, which country do you think produces the most tomatoes in the world? Of course, being Zoom, we can't all see each other's answers, so you have to think to yourself, which country produces the most tomatoes in the world? I think many of you probably will have it, but it's China. If you look here, here's the information. 2018, which is the latest information available from Food and Agriculture. China, with 61 million tons of tomatoes, is the most, with 33, almost 34%. A third of the world's tomatoes come from Japan, from China. This is followed by India with 10%. The USA only ranks down at nearly 4%. Turkey is pretty high, 6%. And then you've got Egypt and Italy. India, a lot of the tomatoes are used in home cooking. Turkey, a lot of it is exported because they're a big exporter. And China, a lot of it is exported as well as internal. But China produces 1/3 of the world's tomatoes. Okay, let's look about tomatoes. Tomatoes come in different shapes, sizes, and colors, as you probably know. So to understand all about tomatoes, we need to know the science of tomatoes. Tomatoes, there are two classes of tomatoes, processor and fresh market. And there are two types of tomatoes, determinate and indeterminate. And I will describe each of those so that you understand it better. So what are the two classes of tomatoes? Processor and fresh market. Processor, for the processor industry, which is canning and salsa and tomato sauce and so on, and fresh market, which is what you have on your salad plate. So here is a picture of processor tomatoes being harvested. You can see the tomatoes are in rows, and what happens is this harvesting machine comes along and it cuts the bottom of the plant and takes it up in a conveyor. And over here, there's a vibrating panel, and it shakes the tomatoes and they fall off. They have to fall off, and then they go up this elevator into the tractor nearby with a great big hopper, and the tomatoes fall in there. So think about that, picking this up, lifting it up, shaking it, taking all the fruit over there. So the plants have to have a particular characteristic. They should all ripen together, and they should be loosely attached to the plant, so when you shake it, they'll actually fall off easily. So here is the thing about processor tomatoes. They flower over a short period of time. That's important because all fruits need to ripen simultaneously to facilitate mechanical harvesting. When you cut the plant and lift it up, you want all the fruits to be ripe, not just a few of them. And the fruits must fall off the plant easily when you shake them so that you can take the fruit. And then the fruits nearly always have a jointless attachment. Now, this is something, a jointless attachment. What is a jointless attachment? Well, here's a picture of two tomatoes attached to the plant. And you have the stem and the stem of the fruit. And a jointed tomato has what looks like a knee joint here. And this is a jointed tomato, and I'll show you a picture later. And this is a jointless. And a jointed tomato, this is where the break occurs when the fruit breaks from the plant. And in a jointless, this is where the fruit breaks. This is where the abscission layer is, and it breaks from the plant. So here are pictures. Here's a jointless tomato. Even though it may look curved, there is no joint. It is one plant. Here is a jointed tomato, and you can see right here the swollen, almost like a knee, and this is where it's jointed, and this is where it's going to break. Here's another picture. Here is a jointless, a smooth stem without any break. And here is a jointed, where you can see the distinct joint of the fruit, and that's where it's going to break. And when these go to the supermarket, this is a tray of jointless tomatoes where the stem, the little stem has broken away and there's absolutely nothing on the fruit. These are jointed tomatoes where they have the last little bit of the stem and the calyx, which looks sort of attractive. Obviously, processors do not want this green stem in their tomato when they're making tomato sauce and so on. So this is why they want a jointless tomato where they don't have to bother about trying to remove this green half stem. So that's always jointless. The other thing about a processor tomato, it has little juice. You don't want a lot of juice in your processor tomato, but you want thick walls, which is good for making salsa and good for making ketchup. You want good solids. And it's good for rough transport. If you think about those great big bins that I showed in the first slide where the tomatoes are growing down, you want them to have thick walls so that the fruit does not collapse under the weight and become squishy. Taste and flavor is less important. They don't worry about taste and flavor because they add their own spices and salts in ketchup and so on. And they usually have 2 or 3 locules. Here's another term. What is a locule? Well, here we have a typical processor tomato, which is Roma, and a locule is the two little areas where the placenta is in the seed. These are two locules. Here we have three locules, but you can see here thick walls, really thick walls, and thick walls are good for giving lots of solids for tomato ketchup and for salsa. Okay, fresh market tomatoes is the other class. And this produces fruit over a long time period, which is what you want. Because if you're growing fresh market tomatoes, you want to produce fruit over a long period of time. So if you're a producer and you're selling them, you can harvest your fruits over a long period of time. If you're growing it in your garden at home, you can also produce pick fruit over a long period of time. You want them to have a fleshy and juicy fruit, which is what you want for fresh market. Taste and flavor are important for fresh market. Of course they are. You want to have a nice taste and a nice flavor in your salad. It doesn't matter whether it's jointed or jointless, because that's not going to affect the fresh market or the taste. Some people say that a jointed tomato looks a little more attractive on the supermarket stand, but that's only depends on people. They tend to have a soft skin as opposed to the processor one, which is not good for rough transport. And it's multilocular. It's usually multilocular. And here you have a picture of a fresh market tomato, and you can see the big difference between the previous processor tomato, which only had 2 or 3 locules, and here we've got a lot of locules, and this is multilocular. So here we are comparing the two side by side, fresh market down here, multilocular, processor tomato, 2 or 3 locules with thick walls, solid walls. Okay, that's the classes. Now what about the two types of tomatoes? Well, these are determinate and indeterminate. A determinate tomato grows for a short, determinate period of time, which is a short, bushy plant flowering over a concentrated period of time. And so all the fruits set and ripen simultaneously. And that's what you want in the processor industry. You want all the fruits to set and ripen simultaneously. So that they use determinate tomatoes. And then you've got indeterminate tomatoes. And indeterminate tomatoes, they grow for a long period of time, as long as water, nutrition, and temperature are adequate, obviously. They flower over a long period of time, so fruits can be harvested over a long period. And this is what the fresh market industry wants. And it is a perennial. It's generally grown as an annual because winter temperatures and so on usually will kill the plant towards the end of the season, but they can grow, in fact, for more than 1 year. So in summary, a determinate tomato tends to be a short plant. An indeterminate tomato will grow to be a tall plant. Now, some determinates actually grow relatively tall. So these are called tall determinate. You don't call them semi-determinate. I've seen people talk about a semi-determinate. Actually, right, that's not true. You can't be semi-pregnant either. Tall determinate is what it is. Okay, so here is a company here that calls it, and it goes way down to the bottom, and it says it's a semi-determinate plant. No, you're wrong. I'm sorry. You're either determinate or you're indeterminate. It should be a tall determinate. Okay, so processor tomatoes are bred and developed to have thick walls, little juice for the processor industry. Fresh market tomatoes are bred and developed to have thinner walls, more juice, better taste for the fresh market. So the question is sometimes asked, if a processor tomato is used for fresh market, does it become a fresh market variety? No. A tomato is whatever you use it for. So if you want to make tomato sauce, if that's what your plan is, use a determinate processor type. So all the fruits are ripened simultaneously. You can pick plenty of fruit at one time and make your tomato sauce or your salsa. If you want to make fresh salsa, also use a processor type, so you'll have thick walls to get nice pieces of tomato. But if you want to have a few tomatoes for salads over a long period of time, then use an indeterminate type. People often ask, what about heirloom tomatoes? Heirloom tomatoes, here's a picture in the Camarillo farmers market of heirloom tomatoes, very popular nowadays. Heirloom tomatoes are called heritage tomatoes in England. They're usually always open pollinated. They're not hybrids. They're usually always indeterminate, so they grow for a long period of time. They have a wide variety of fruit, color, shape, and flavor and size, as you can see from this slide in the Camarillo market. Fruit shapes are often not uniform. They're usually multilocular. You know what that means now, thin-walled. They do not keep well after being picked. They often crack at the shoulder. There's just something about heirloom tomatoes. People grow heirloom tomatoes and they complain about shoulder cracking. Unfortunately, it's just something that happens to heirloom tomatoes, and there's not much that you can do about it. I'll talk a little bit later on about fruit cracking. Plants are more often prone to diseases because they have not had any disease resistant bred into them, although some people dispute that. Some varieties need a lot of space to grow. They were developed over the years where there was a lot of space in people's garden, and so they grow pretty large and bushy. And they've been selected over the years to perform better in some areas than others. So depending on who collects and sells the seed, plant characteristics may differ slightly. So if you like a particular heirloom variety in your area that's been successful for you, continue growing it. And if you like the seed company that's been giving your seed, use that, because seed companies grow and develop their own, and they select for their own characteristics. And so they could, one brandy boy could differ from another company's one, depending on who collects and sells the seed. This is a picture of what probably most of us are seeing these days in the supermarket. Cluster tomatoes. Look at these. These are cluster tomatoes or on-the-vine tomatoes. And this is a new class. It's referred to as a saladette tomato. Saladette. They're medium-sized fruit. The fruit shape can be round or oblong. They have thick walls, so they're good for cooking and to make salsa and sauce. They're not as juicy as a full fresh market, but they're juicy enough to eat in a salad. And they're often sold in clusters or trusters, as you can see here. And they usually have 3 or 4 locules. And they can be jointed or jointless. Jointed or jointless has nothing to do with the taste and flavor of a tomato. It's just purely a genetic characteristic. So a saladette tomato can be jointed or jointless. So here we have a typical saladette tomato. You can see 3, 4 locules, thickish walls. It's not quite as determined as that Roma processor tomato that I told you. It's not quite as fleshy and juicy as the fresh market one that I showed you. So it's like a hybrid between the two, a mixture between the two. And this is very common now. So these on-the-vine tomatoes or cluster tomatoes, they're very popular in supermarkets. And again, these need to ripen simultaneously because you want to put a cluster on your shelf that is all ripe. And all the fruit in the cluster should be of uniform size. And the attachment must be strong. You don't want the fruits to fall off easily, like in a processor tomato. They should have a long shelf life. They need to stay fresh and firm for a long time. And there's a perception that cluster or on the vine tomatoes are classy and higher quality, but that's just a perception.
Julian, I have a question.
Go ahead.
There's somebody wants to know about dwarf tomatoes. Are they considered determinate or indeterminate?
Is a dwarf tomato determinate or indeterminate?
Mm-hmm.
You have to see what variety or what hybrid it is. I don't know. I've not come across a dwarf, whether it is a determinate or indeterminate. That's another characteristic. Whether a determinate or indeterminate has been bred as a dwarf, I don't know. Probably, I don't know about that one. It's just to see what the genetic characteristic is. I've not come across a dwarf tomato, really. Okay?
Okay.
So here we have in my local supermarket, I went there one day and I saw on the same display what looks like exactly the same. It costs the same. Here is jointed tomatoes, jointless tomatoes, and here you can see jointed tomatoes. They look the same, they probably taste the same, but these are in fact two different genetic varieties, but they taste the same, they look the same, and they're priced the same. You can amuse yourselves when next you are in the supermarket looking at cluster tomatoes to see if they're jointed or jointless. Again, there's no difference in taste, it's just a variety thing. So whether you pick a jointed or jointless one is up to you. Now, this is interesting. I found this interesting. This is a Roma tomato, which is normally bred to break off easily as a processor. They've now bred it to be a cluster tomato, so it will not break off easily. So the plant breeders are onto all kinds of breeding things now as far as marketing is concerned. So you can now get a Roma tomato. It says down here, Roma as a cluster tomato, which is not going to break off easily. This is something new for me, but dwarf I've not seen. Here is something amusing, I think, which is interesting. This is in the Camarillo farmers market, and I've not seen this stand for some year or two now, but there was a stand and they were selling Tradiro, Tradiro, Tradiro tomatoes. And here they are as a cluster or on the vine, Tradiro, as if Tradiro was a great variety tomato. Well, here's an extract from the University of Florida, which did trials on a number of tomatoes. And they found the highest yield was found in these three varieties, Ambience, Durasol, and Tradiro. The largest fruits were found in three varieties, Durasol, Tradiro, and Ambience. The overall best performer were Ambience and Tradiro. The overall taste test conducted showed Aranca as the best, Tradiro as the poorest. So here is this tomato with the poorest taste flavor, but still being sold. Why? Because it's the highest yield and the highest cluster, which tends to show that the people who are producing it don't care too much about what tastes good. They just want what yields well, and so they can make more money, which is a normal thing for a farmer. You want a high yield, but this was interesting for me. Okay, moving on a little bit. Very often you will see a tomato and you will see in the seed packet or in the thing letters after it. Here we have Celebrity with VFFNT after it, and here's Early Girl with VFF after it. These are initials which signify disease resistance, and they have developed hybrids which are resistant to various diseases. So if you know of a problem in your area, you can select a hybrid with this resistance. Here are the common ones. AB stands for Alternaria blight. You've got F for Fusarium, FF or F2 for Fusarium wilt, races 1 and 2. LB is late blight, N is nematodes, T or TMV is tobacco mosaic virus, and V is verticillium wilt. These are common diseases in tomatoes. So if you know you have a problem, then you look for a variety with one of these letters on it. So here we have Celebrity, which is resistant to verticillium wilt, Fusarium race 2, nematodes, and tobacco mosaic virus, and early girl. Another question I'm often asked is, why do some varieties have dark green shoulders? Here is somebody growing a fruit, and the fruits are developing, and you've got these dark green shoulders. Here's another one here, fruits are developing, dark green shoulders. And people get worried. They think this is some kind of disease or some problem with the fruit. Don't worry. This is a varietal characteristics where some fruit have uniform green when they're immature and others have a dark green shoulder. Occasionally it may be heat related, but usually it's just a genetic characteristic. And breeders, in fact, designated, they say their variety is either dark green shoulder or uniform green. But the good thing is dark green shoulder will turn completely red if left on the plant to ripen, unless you've got a psychological problem. So here you have 3 fruits. This is from my garden. Big boy tomato, which I grew. And whoops, it's supposed to be turned off. Here we have big boy, oh, wait a minute. Hang on, I've got to turn this thing off. Here we have big boy tomato, which has these dark green shoulders on it. And I left it completely, and look, when they matured completely, these are the same 3 fruits turn completely red. So nothing to worry about, they will turn red. And here are, fruit shapes are something interesting. You may find this interesting. Plant breeders come up with all kinds of different shapes of tomatoes. There's round, flat round, square round, deep round, blocky round, globe, oblate, cylindrical. You don't need to worry about these, but this is how the tomato industry has gone now with all kinds of different shapes. Here is an extract from a seed catalog where they actually show the different varieties, days to maturity, and they give the shape, deep oblate. They give the shoulder ripening, uniform green shoulder. They give disease resistance. So if you're into tomato growing in a big way, you can actually choose a variety that's got the particular characteristics that's best suited for your area. So how many of you have opened a tomato and seen this? I get a few questions every now and again from somebody who said, oh my word, I sliced open my tomato and I saw all these like white worms growing from it. It's not white worms growing from it. It is, seed is germinating before it has detached itself from the mother plant. So in tomato, there's a hormone called abscisic acid, and that prevents the seed from germinating. But if you keep the tomato too long, especially in a warm climate, this hormone actually starts to break down. So then the seed, which is in a moist, warm environment, will start to germinate. So it often happens if you keep tomatoes for a long time in a warm kitchens. And eventually the seedlings will emerge, but the fruit is perfectly safe to eat. There's nothing wrong with this. This is just a young little developing seedling. So if you leave it, I mean, here they are. This was kept open now. And actually, because now they're getting light, the leaves are starting to produce chlorophyll. And here's an extreme where the seeds have actually broken through the fruit and have actually started to grow. And if you were to take this out and carefully plant it, it could grow into a perfectly normal plant. So if you see this, don't worry, you can eat it or throw it away if you don't like the idea of it. Okay, that's
Julian, before you move on, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Are hybrids typically genetically modified with chemicals, and should they be avoided?
I will come to hybrids in a moment.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Just repeat the question.
Are hybrids typically genetically modified with chemicals, and should they be avoided?
Okay, I will come to that when I come to hybrids. Okay, here's for the different types of tomatoes. So now we're going to talk about how to grow tomatoes. Okay, site selection, you need to choose a place which sees plenty of sunshine. Tomatoes like sunshine. If you don't have enough sun, you'll get a lot of vegetation, but less fruit. So you want a sunny place, dig the soil deeply, add manure or compost. The soil should be well drained. Tomatoes don't like wet roots. Make raised beds if you like. And if possible, choose an area which has not grown tomatoes for the past couple of years. I'll get into the reason why, because you can get a buildup of diseases if you grow tomatoes continually in one place. So if you're using a box or container, use potting soil, add steer manure. I always like steer manure, which gives a bit of structure to the soil and mix it well. Choose what you want. Now that you know the different types, choose determinate, indeterminate, processor, fresh market, choose what it is you want. Choose heirloom, hybrid, or open pollinated. I'll get to hybrids in a moment. And if you need to select a variety with a particular disease resistant, do that. And make sure you have enough space for your plants. They should be at least 2 feet apart. If you don't have enough space, only grow enough tomatoes that you have space for, because if they're too compacted, if they're too compressed together, you will not get a lot of good fruit. So what variety to show here? I'm just showing this, which is interesting. Here is a seed tomato. Here's a packet. It says early girl hybrid, early girl hybrid. And if you look on the back here, it says days to harvest 52. 52 days to harvest. Great, you could say to yourself, I'll sow my plants at the beginning of April, and in 52 days, I'll be able to harvest fruit. In May, June, I'll have fruit by the end of June, early July for the 4th of July. Here's another tomato early girl. It also says days to harvest 60. Again, just 2 months. But wait, there's an asterisk under the days to harvest. There's an asterisk. And if you look at the asterisk and you go down here, it says from setting out transplants, from setting out transplants. Well, that's very different. That's not from seeding, from setting out transplants. And if you think about it, it takes 3 to 4 weeks from seeding to when you can transplant. So this days until harvest is somewhat misleading. It's not from when you sow the seed, it's from setting out transplants. And if you buy early girl tomato, here is a peg from a 6-pack from a nursery, and it says matures in 52 to 60 days. That's okay when you are buying the actual 6-pack with the seeds in it, with the plants in it, because it's already grown for 3 or 4 weeks. And here we have again the same thing, harvest in 53 to 63 days, but that is after you have transplanted it. So be aware that in most catalogs, days to maturity refers to after transplanting. And here we have, in this particular catalog, they say of growing tomatoes, days to maturity from transplant. So be aware of that. So people often ask, can I collect my own and use my own seed? Yes, of course you can, but there's a big but here. Can I collect seed from my own plants? If you collect seed from a hybrid variety, you're only going to contain 50% of hybrid plants. 25% will be from the one parent, and 25% will be from the other parent. A hybrid variety is a cross between 2 parents with particular characteristics which come together to give the one that you were desiring. And so if you collect seed from a hybrid variety, only half of your plants will be the hybrid, 25% will be one, 25% will be the other. It involves genetics, which is a little too complicated to explain. Now, to go to the person who asked a question about hybrids, are hybrids made chemically? Hybrids and genetically modified. There are absolutely no genetically modified vegetables on the garden, except for perhaps squash and sweet corn. Tomatoes, there are no genetically modified tomato hybrids on the market. There used to be one. Some years ago, a company produced a genetically modified tomato, probably about 15 years ago, and I talk about that in a different class, but it was not very successful, and breeders were able to, using perfectly normal breeding techniques of just pollination, to get the desired characteristics. So any hybrid tomato that you buy, whether you buy the seed of hybrid tomato or whether you buy the seedlings of hybrid tomato, has not been genetically modified. It's been bred by perfectly normal cross-pollination using pollen. There's no chemical modification at all. So you don't have to worry about that. If you collect seed from a self-pollinated variety, then the plants will be the same. So how do you know if you have a hybrid or self-pollinated? Look at the label. If the label says it's hybrid, or if it says it's F1, which stands for filial 1, then you know it's a hybrid. But be assured that the hybrid has been obtained perfectly normally with normal plant breeding techniques. Heirlooms are always self-pollinated. There are no hybrids in heirlooms that I'm aware of, because these are old varieties that have come down from a long time ago. So how do you collect your own seed if you want to? Select fruits which are fully mature, ripe and red, cut in half, scoop out the pulp, place it in a glass jar, just put a little bit of paper on top, and keep it in a warm place for 2 to 4 days, because you need natural fermentation to start. And that breaks down the yellowy green gel around the seed. And after 2 or 3 days, if a skin or mold is formed on the top, don't worry, just take this off, add water, shake it to allow the heavy seeds to settle to the bottom, and then carefully pour off any floating seeds and pulp, strain through a sieve, and then wash until the traces of pulp have been removed, and then put it on a paper towel to dry. Don't use heat. Don't put it in the oven because you could heat it up and damage it. Just leave it out to dry, and then store it in a paper envelope in a cool place. Don't put it in plastic, because it may not be dry enough and it will just start to get moldy. And if you're going to do this, remember to write the name and the variety on the envelope so you don't forget what it is. So you've got your seeds, you bought seeds or you made your own seeds. How are you going to do it? Start the seeds in small trays using finely worked soil or potting mix. And don't sow the seed more than ½ an inch deep, because the seed is small, so they can't be too deep. Space them out thinly, cover with some soil, press down lightly. And then you've got to keep that top inch moist. Not too wet, but you've got to keep it moist. If you leave too much water, then you could get a disease called damping off. And if you don't put enough water, that top inch will dry out. And as the seedling is growing, if it gets too dry, it will dry out and die. So a spray bottle is best, just to keep on spraying, maybe once or twice a day, to keep that topsoil moist. When you're ready to transplanting, when the seeds are about 5 or 6 inches tall, you need to sprinkle a little general purpose fertilizer over the area that you're going to plant, the area that you've decided where you're going to grow your seeds. Work it well into the soil, water the bed so the soil is nicely moist, and select strong, healthy seedlings, 4 to 6 inches tall. And then remove 1 or 2 bottom leaves, and I'll show you pictures of this, from the stem, and plant the seedlings deeply, well below their original soil line. And you cover up the new stem, press the soil down well, and I'll show you pictures of why. You space the plants 2 or 3 feet apart, which is what you need. And if you're going to use a mulch on your bed, now is the time to do it. So here we have, this is a good size to plant. Well, sometimes, in fact, when you buy a plant, you get 2 seedlings in a little container. I actually look for 2 seedlings. Here we have 2 seedlings. So you pull it out of the box. You have to separate these. You cannot plant them together because each plant needs its own space. So you get a bucket of water, half fill it with water, put the 2 seedlings in, move it up and down to get rid of all the soil around it. So now you end up with these 2 seedlings with our soil removed. Then you need to go down, grip each stem way down here at the base, way down at the base. Put it back in the bucket, move it up and down, gently moving it up and down while you tease the roots apart. And the roots are floating, and then eventually you will end up with 2 seedlings with their root system. So for me, I got 2 seedlings to the price of 1. This is the right height to transplant. So here we have a tomato seedling. Take out these bottom 2 the lower 2 leaves. So now I've taken these out. So these are missing. And so now this here is the original soil line. And I'm going to plant it deeply so that the soil, in fact, comes up to there. So here is well down in. You can see this is the bottom leaf now, and I've actually planted it so that this is now very close to the surface. So there's an extra 3 inches or so of stem in the soil. So here they are, planted deeply in the soil. What's going to happen is that the plant will produce new adventitious roots from the stem that's now planted in the soil. And here you can see a good example. Here is a plant. This was the original soil level. It was planted this deep, and look at all the extra roots it's put out. Here's the other one. Look at all the extra roots. So this plant, instead of just this, has got all of these roots. And this plant's more roots, more ways to feed the plant and let it to grow. If you have, some people sometimes have said, I have a grub problem in my soil. If that's a problem, you can try and protect your seedlings by putting a cardboard collar from a toilet roll or towel roll, but this is not something that most people have to put up with. Okay, so tomatoes, they should have about 4 feet to develop. If they're crowded too closely, the fruits will be small. So make sure your plants have 2 feet apart so that they can have room to grow. If you're using a 4-foot square garden, which is quite popular, 2 foot by 2 foot per tomato, so you will just have 4 plants in a 4-foot square garden. If you don't use a cage, a tomato plant can take up, even more room. Tomatoes can be grown in 1 square foot. I've seen, people talk about you growing it in a square garden, and here's an article I saw somewhere where here's 4-foot square garden, 1 foot by 1 foot, and you put 1 different variety in each square foot. So you've got 16 plants in a 4 foot. This is very difficult. You have to prune each plant to 1 stem only, because each plant is only being given 1 foot to grow in. So if you want to try something like this, you can, but this needs a lot of work and is not easy. So what about fertilizing? After the initial fertilizing and planting, when I said add some fertilizer just before you plant it, The next application is when the second flower opens. So you're not going to put any more fertilizer for another 4 to 5 weeks. And I suggest a general purpose fertilizer. You can buy a specialty tomato fertilizer, but if you use just general purpose, you could use this for, for all of your vegetables. Or you can use one for tomatoes. And what's good about formulated tomatoes is it has less nitrogen. And this is important because if you give too much nitrogen to your tomato, it will grow very vigorously and rank a lot of vegetation and not too much fruit. So do not use lawn fertilizer, which is high in nitrogen. Using compost or mature, apply it on the surface, work it into the soil. But I find you can either get one for tomatoes or a general purpose one is just fine. Watering tomatoes do not like their roots to be wet, so don't overwater. Again, if the fruits are too dry, the plant stresses. So you've got to treat your plants like Goldilocks. Not too much, not too little, just right. And water according to your soil type. Clay soils will need water not so frequently because the soil holds the moisture. Sandy soils will need to be watered more frequently. And watering in the morning is better than in the evening. And try not to wet the leaves, just water the soil. If you wet the leaves, you can be possibly allowing diseases to come in. But in our dry climate in California, it's not so much of a problem. Now, here is something important that I want to stress on you. When you're growing tomatoes, you need to remove the first 2 flower sets, first 2 flower clusters. This is the reason. In nature, plants want to reproduce themselves. So they put every effort they can into the first and second cluster to produce a fruit. So once they have reproduced themselves, then they can sort of sit back and relax and say, well, I've reproduced myself. I don't need to bother too much about the other fruit. So wait until the first and second flower clusters have formed. Here's the first, here's the second. If you look here, this has been removed and this has been removed. You do that and the plant will say, oh my goodness, I better make sure that all the rest of my fruits do well, and you get a much better yield and a higher yield with having removed it. Here is another one where the first and second fruits clusters are showing. Now I've removed them. It's best to wait until you can see both, then remove both. The reason is you might remove this one as soon as it appears, and then a week later you'll see this one and you'll say, is this the first or the second? Did I remove this one? So if you wait until they both are there, remove them both, here they are, and then you know that you've done it. And this is the time, here we have again, first and second having been removed. And this is the time when you do that, you then put a cage over your fruit. And I like to put a peg stake down in the cage to help hold this cage up, because they do fall over easily with the weight of the fruit. Here again is the third cluster now with a lot of flowers on it, because this tomato has realized I've cut off the first and second, so look at the good cluster fruit set that I'm going to get. Okay, I'm just going to digress a little bit to peppers now, because peppers are the same family as tomato, same family Solanum. Here is a typical pepper plant. It grows up and then it produces a node and it produces 2 or 3 branches, usually 3. I'm showing 2 because I don't want to have too many lines on my drawing. Then there's another node and it produces another 2. And then a bit grows a bit, and then another 2 branches. Grows a bit, another 2 branches. Again, with peppers, you need to remove the first and the second. In the leaf axil here, you will see here's the first one, here's the second one. You've got to take these out and you leave the rest. So this is here is the plant. I've taken out the first, I've taken out the second, and at these third level, you leave it. Here we have a plant here. Here's my pepper plant. And way down there, there's the first one. And here I've taken it off. Here are the second ones. And you can also see here, there was one. These are the second that I have removed. Here is the third level of flowers developing. No first, no second. Here is the third developing. And look at the result. Nothing on the first, nothing on the second, but look at all these peppers I've got on the third level. Here's another one, another plant, nothing on the nothing on the first, nothing on the second, but look what I got on the third. Contrast that with this one here where I did not take the first one out. And look, lovely big pepper on the first plant, but nothing anywhere else. Look at this one, lovely pepper on the first node, but nothing on the rest of it. Same thing for eggplant. Here is an eggplant, which is the same family. Beautiful big eggplant on the first one, but these other fruits never developed. So eggplant is the same family as tomato and pepper. So back to tomatoes. So pruning, I'm asked, do you need to prune? Pruning the bottom side stems or suckers. Tomato plants do not have to be pruned. They do not have to be pruned. If you do, the plant will be less dense, the fruit set will be reduced, but the fruits will be larger because there's all the same root area, but they will produce bigger fruit. If you prune too much, you could have less leaf coverage, and then you could have sun scald. So you could prune a few side shoots when the plant is young, but if you if you don't prune, the plants will be large and bushy, a lot of protection from the sun, more fruits, somewhat smaller. It's up to you. It does not matter if you don't prune the shine. You could try pruning one and not another, just to compare. So here we have a plant here where I've got these branches. I, in fact, pruned a couple of these ones. You could see this branch here is no longer there. This branch here I've removed. This one that was here is no longer here. So I pruned a few of the lower ones when it was this height after I had just cut the flowers off. So here you can see the result now. I've just got a few main stems down at the bottom. I've taken the leaves off so you can see the pictures, but they're still growing very nicely with plenty of ground cover, leaf cover above. Look, all this, even though there's light pruning, there is still good, healthy growth and good leaf cover able to protect the fruits from the sun. And here we have the fruits, lots of fruits, as you could see, because I cut out the first and second flower, but it's tending to fall over now, tending to fall over the cage, and the fruits are somewhat exposed. They need to be protected from the sun, and this is a very efficient way, I find. You can also use straw, you could get a burlap sack, but if they're too exposed to the sun, you don't want to get sun scald, and this also protects the fruit from birds as well. So here we have, look at all of these fruits I had in spite of the pruning. Look at all the fruits that I've got. There's way more than my family can eat, so we give these to friends. So pruning is something that you could do. So harvesting, what about harvesting? Allow the fruits to fully mature on the plant if you can. They get best flavor. Pick fruits in the morning when it's cool is best. Never keep your tomatoes in the fridge. Tomatoes do not like to be kept in the fridge. They lose flavor. If you've got green fruits, then just let them ripen at room temperature. But most of the tomatoes, except for heirlooms, most of the tomatoes these days are bred with what's called a ripening inhibiting gene, which allows them to stay firm and ripe for a number of weeks, for 3 or 4 weeks at a time before they get soft. Heirloom tomatoes do tend to get soft after a while. Just throw this in for interest. How do commercial growers produce their tomatoes? They do it. Here's a big block here of medium, and this is not soil. This is like wool, like something wool. The word escapes me. And they've got pipes here, and water and fertilizer and nutrients are squirted in every half an hour or so the plants get continually fed. They are grown up on long, these are indeterminate plants which are attached to wires up on the top, and you can see here are the fruits. And look how long the stems get. The stems get very, very long. Just shows how long an indeterminate stem plant can grow. This is the medium that they grow in, and you can see them long out here. They have bumblebees inside the greenhouse, not to spread pollen, but to shake pollen. Tomatoes are self-pollinating. They just need the fruit to be shaken for the pollen to be released, and bumblebees visit the flowers. So, but they don't taste too good, as I think a lot of people realize, and everyone agrees the best tasting tomatoes are those grown by yourself and eaten a few hours after picking, always so much more better than the supermarket grown ones. I'll come to an hour, but let me just take a quick look, those of you who want to stay, at some of the pests and diseases encountered in growing tomatoes, because a lot of people have this as a problem. This is a very common one. People have the blackening of the ends of their fruits, and they say, what is that? The ends of my fruit are growing black. This is called blossom end rot, caused by poor calcium uptake as a result of inconsistent watering. If you don't water consistently, the plants don't take up calcium. So you need to be more regular. Use as much if possible. So if you see this problem, try adding extra calcium, but it could be too late to add it when you see it. So you need to think about this ahead of time. So if it's a regular problem, add lime to your soil, or you can actually buy a chemical. Here's something called Rot Stop, which contains calcium. This is a concentrate which you put in a thing in spray. This is all ready to spray. Rot Stop, it contains calcium. Here's another one called Maxi Cal, which corrects calcium deficiency. And you can see it contains 10% calcium. So if this is a problem that you are faced with, buy one of these calcium additives, and you can add it to the soil ahead of time or spray it onto your plants as they are growing and developing to minimize blossom end rot. Here's another one, Folical, which is calcium concentrate. So there are lots of products out there that you can use to combat blossom end rot. Sun scald, this is a common one where you have fruit that is exposed to the sun, caused by exposure of the fruit to the sun, especially if you cut too many branches. Sudden increase in daytime can help this, but just try to prevent this, protect the developing fruits. As you saw my earlier slide, I used a plastic cover, or you could use straw, or you can use burlap. Fruit cracking is something that often happens. People see fruit cracking. This is a sudden increase in watering. If you don't water for a long period of time and then suddenly give a lot of water, the fruit absorbs moisture quickly, then the skin can grow, so it just cracks. So try to keep the soil moist at all times, and don't give a feast and famine to your water. But on the other hand, some varieties are also more prone to cracking than others, but it's caused
I
by,
can tell all the stuff we're doing wrong.
what's that? Okay.
Right.
Okay, then we have cat face. This is a different kind of thing, but this is at the other end. Here we have fruit cracking, which you can see is at the stem end, and you've got cat face, which is at the other end, of the blossom end. And this is just caused by the developing ovary after pollination. There's not much you can do about this. This is usually caused by high temperatures. So growth cracks occur at the peduncle end, which is where they attach to the plant, and cat face at the blossom end. You've got powdery mildew, which is very common. A lot of people have that. You can see the white powder on the leaves, which eventually makes the leaves turn yellow. It's common in California, not usually a big problem. If you grow the plants in a sunny area with good circulation, you won't get too much. Try to avoid wetting the leaves when you're watering them. You can spray with baking soda if you like to try and prevent the spread, but it's something that most people who grow tomatoes get anyway. And then they've got blights. You've got early blight, which causes the leaves to go black and so on, and eventually they wilt. Black or brown spots appear on the leaves, depends on the weather conditions. Again, avoid wetting the leaves of the plant, and you can remove and destroy diseased foliage. Then you've got late blight, which occurs late in the season. Symptoms are very similar from early blight. They appear on the lesions and stem. Eventually, the leaves and plant dies, and most of us who grow tomatoes will have late blight towards the end of the season. Just remove and destroy diseased foliage. You've got tomato spotted wilt virus, which is one which occasionally people come across where the fruits look mottled. And this is not a nice disease. The fruits look mottled, and this is the leaves also become yellow and mottled. And this is not very nice. It's a virus which is spread by a tiny insect called thrips. And when you see this, there's not much you can do about this. You can spray with insecticidal soap early if you can as a preventative, but you need to remove infected plants because this becomes a source of infection for other plants. Some varieties are resistant to this, so if you see this, next time you grow a tomato, try and get a variety which has these letters after the name. Here we have an unhappy wilting tomato plant, and this could be, sometimes the plant starts to grow or wilt, does not grow vigorously, and the fruits are small and you're not quite sure what it is. This could indicate that the roots are not transporting water because they've been blocked, and this could be caused by a number of the various root diseases that we have, but it could also be caused by something called nematode, root knot nematode, which is a tiny little worm that lives in the soil, gets into the plant and blocks the vascular system of the plant so it can't suck up water and nutrients. So pull up the plant, examine the roots. And if the roots are covered in galls or bumps, you almost certainly have root knot nematode, which is this worm that lives in the soil, feeds the roots and blocks the vascular system. If they don't have any galls, then you don't have a problem. Here's a plant here, which is looking not happy because the plant is not being able to get any water or nutrients. And when you pull it up, here is a healthy plant where these roots are fine. Here is a diseased plant where look at how swollen the roots are with these bumps and nematodes on it. Here is another picture of a root with all of these galls and bumps. This is root knot nematode. Carrots also have it. If you pull up your carrots and you see these bumps on it, then your soil has got nematodes. Carrots can also be affected. Here is eggplant, which is the same family. You've got these bumps. This is nematode. This is peppers. So whenever you reach the end of your season, always pull up your plants, have a look at the root system and see what they look like. Now, don't confuse it with nitrogen fixing nodules. This is a legume. These are beans. If you have beans, which is a legume, they can produce nitrogen fixing nodules, which is a good thing. So don't worry if you pull up peas or beans and you see these bumps on your roots, that's fine. So this is what happens. I'm going to move on. So how do you manage nematodes? For practical home gardeners, it's very difficult. Keep the area fallow for a year or two. No plants if you can. Don't move soil from infected area to a different area. And clean tools after working in infested soil and going to healthy soil. People say planting French marigolds may reduce infestation. It might. There's no scientific evidence that says it actually does, but some people claim that the marigold produces an exudate that kills nematodes, so it's worth trying. Or grow a resistant variety with N in its name. Look for a variety with N in its name, and that will withstand nematodes. You could sterilize the soil by solarization, which some people try to do, but it's not terribly effective. It only controls the pests in the top 6 to 8 inches of soil. It may kill some weeds. How to do it is you loosen the soil with a fine tilth, irrigate it so that the soil is moist, cover with a clear plastic, better than black because you want it to take in the sun. Put plastic on the surface and leave during the hot period, and you hope that when the sun shines, it will heat up the soil and kill the nematodes, but not terribly effective. So if you know you have root knot nematode, try solarization, but remove and destroy all disease and dead plant matter at the end of the growing season, and wait a few years before growing tomatoes in the same place. Couple more pests. Here's tomato hornworm, which some of us see from time to time. Huge, great big worm. If you see it, quickly pull it off because they have a voracious appetite and they can eat all the leaves off your plant. This is an interesting one. I've never seen it, but if you see a hornworm like this, these are actually wasp eggs. A wasp has laid its eggs on the back of this hornworm, and the eggs will hatch and the little larvae will go into the feed into the worm, and so they will kill the hornworm while the larvae feed on the insides of the hornworm, and then they will emerge as an adult wasp. So if you happen to see this, leave it because it's a good guy. This is the bad guy. Here we have armyworm. Sometimes you get these holes in tomatoes, and this is the same as corn earworm. Difficult to control because once the larvae is inside the fruit, then you can't get at it with a spray. You can use neem oil or something like that, but it's not usually a big problem. This is what the worm does. If you see it, take it off, and you can spray with oil if you like, which is organic. Tomato leaf miner, very common, very common. If you see your tomato plants with leaves like this, here's a close-up. This is a tiny little worm which lives in the leaf itself, and you can see its pattern as it's going, feeding right in the center of the leaf. Difficult to control because it's protected by the leaf, but it's tolerated. If it's not too bad, just live with it. It's not going to affect your fruit, and it's reducing the surface area of your tomato a little bit. If it's very concentrated, you could break off the branches with these leaves, put them in a plastic bag in your trash, but this is common, but not to worry about too much. So there are various other diseases, molds and viruses and so on, but we've covered the most common. And there are other insects, aphids, mites, and whiteflies. Again, we've covered the most. So unless you're a trained plant pathologist, it's difficult for you to distinguish between these diseases. So if you see a plant wilting and not growing well, pull it up, look at the roots. Towards the end of the plant's growing cycle, you'll probably get one of the blights anyway, so don't worry too much. So just try and to avoid these diseases. Try and keep the plants healthy, feed and water them regularly, and practice good hygiene. And finally, I'm often asked after this, what is a tomatillo? What's a tomatillo? Here is a typical picture of a tomatillo. Tomatillo belongs to the same family, but a different genus from the tomato. It's sometimes called green tomato, husk tomato, Mexican tomato, or tomate verde. And the husk surrounding the fruit is an extension of the calyx or sepal. This is the calyx or sepal that goes around the fruit. And whereas the flower on a tomato is strongly self-pollinating, the flower on a tomatillo is strongly self-incompatible. That's very important, which means it will not pollinate itself. So another plant must be nearby to allow cross-pollination. You can grow one tomato plant and it will pollinate and give you fruit. If you grow a single plant of a tomatillo, it will not develop and set fruit because it's self-incompatible. It needs another tomatillo plant nearby. So you need to have two tomatillo plants, or your neighbor has to have one if you're going to grow tomatillos. Here's a picture of a tomatillo flower, somewhat like a tomato, but quite distinctive. And here is the plant fruit, and you can see where the fruits have the calyx are covering the fruit. So now you know all about tomatoes, maybe more than you wanted to know. Any questions? Sorry, we've gone over the hour.
We had a couple of questions, but I was able to answer them. And it doesn't look like we have any more. So we're good. We're done.
Okay, go for your tomato, guys. Go grow lots of tomatoes.
Tomato mania.
Thank you so much. It was
Okay.